Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Henry, head of schools at Moshi, and I'm so excited to be here today with you for this live Q&A. And just a quick note that we will be recording this, so if you can only listen to a couple minutes or a portion, or you're distracted by kids in the background, it will be recorded and saved for you in the Generation Moshi group. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a minute to introduce myself and do a couple of housekeeping things. My background is in early childhood education and also counseling. My very first job out of college was as an early childhood public educator. And then I moved into early intervention where I supported babies through 3-year-olds and their families in their homes. Which was really interesting and helpful, especially when I started a family of my own. I had lots of different examples of different parenting styles and ways to raise up our babies. And then I moved into the nonprofit sector and worked with schools all over the world on social emotional learning implementation and ongoing sustainability for teachers and whole school perspective. And I'm so happy that I got the opportunity to join Moshi just a couple of months ago to support their work with family and children well-being, and especially in the educator market, and really to help bring Moshi to more schools around the world. A few housekeeping things. Let's take good care of each other today, especially, we're going to be talking about some parenting ideas and tips and challenges and successes. And so I encourage you to interact with me and with each other in the chat. And in that, just remembering to be respectful and kind. This is our group, Generation Moshi. I'm also a member of this group, and we're all here to support each other. Please use the chat. I'm here to answer questions throughout the presentation, and then I'll stay on for a bit after for a dialogue. And I continue to also encourage you to share resources. I'll be dropping a few resources in the chat throughout the presentation. And so if it sparks your memory of something that was particularly helpful or interesting to you as a parent, feel free to also put in some resources so that we can begin to build a bank of strategies and tips and ideas to support each other. All right, so we're going to get started with the presentation. We can pull up the first slide. All right, so today we're talking about the importance of social and emotional learning in the classroom and at home. I put here a picture of my family so that you can kind of see the age ranges that are represented in my home. My oldest is 12, she's in 7th grade. My middle daughter is 9, she's in 4th grade, and my youngest is 7, she's in 2nd grade. And so in our home, we have, in thinking about social emotional learning, we have children at all different stages of the developmental continuum. And so every day is very interesting, where we're learning and growing and teaching each other and modeling for each other different social emotional learning skills. And throughout the presentation, I'll be giving you some examples of how this shows up in my home. And I look forward to hearing from you also about what your home looks like and sounds like. All right, we can go on to the next. So what exactly is social emotional learning? So when you think about social emotional learning, it's 3 things. It's the knowledge that we have, the skills we have, and the attitudes that we have. And all of these help us with our own healthy identities, who we are and how we show up in the world. Managing our emotions, and of course, being able to manage our emotions help us to achieve our personal goals, our collective goals, because learning in life is social, whether it's in our home, in our classrooms, or out in our careers. Someday, our emotions play a big role in how we behave and interact with others. Our knowledge, skills, and attitudes also help us feel and show empathy for others. If you listen to the first Q&A in this group last weekend, Dr. Tegan Reeves talked about empathy, and empathy is one of the core social emotional learning competencies. Also being able to establish and maintain supportive relationships, and these start at birth. Your very first relationship between caregiver and baby starts on day 1, and we're going to talk about that continuum through adulthood. And lastly, making responsible and caring decisions. So, our decisions are for us as individuals, and our decisions are also contribute to the collective greater good. And so, one of the competencies we'll be talking about is how our decisions show up in a social context. All of this I've pulled from CASEL, which stands for the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. They are really a national and global leader on social emotional learning. They do advocacy work. They also provide resources for parents, for educators, for whole schools. They offer a lot of different ideas, and I'll be sharing some of their resources during the presentation so that you can go check out what they have. Everything on their website is free and available for the public. All right, let's move on to the next. So I was thinking about when I was preparing for this presentation and this conversation, how to best describe what social emotional learning is, especially for people who are really new to that terminology, to the concepts of social emotional learning. If your background is not in education or counseling, if you're new to being a parent, social emotional learning may be a very new concept for you. So CASEL has put together what they call SEL 101. And it really is a great animated, really short video on what social emotional learning is. And so we're going to watch this short video now, and then we'll kind of break it down after this and how it looks like in the home and in the classroom. So let's play that video.
Think about the young people in your lives and all the different places where they're learning about themselves, how to relate to others, and work together on goals. How can we intentionally create learning experiences that will help all young people develop and maintain positive relationships, become lifelong learners, and contribute to a more caring, just world? Educators, researchers, community members, families, and the students themselves agree what we need is social and emotional learning, or SEL. SEL is the process through which young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that help us to understand ourselves, connect with others, achieve our goals, and support our communities. We all need opportunities to learn and engage in environments where we feel safe, valued, and a sense of belonging. So how does SEL help schools, families, and communities work together so that all young people have these kinds of learning experiences and achieve success in education, careers, and life? CASEL's framework identifies 5 areas of competence that together help us develop a healthy sense of who we are, manage stress, understand the views of others, and work together to create schools and communities where everyone can grow their strengths and interests. Self-awareness is about how we think about ourselves and who we are. It includes understanding our culture, our thoughts, feelings, and what we believe we're capable of, and understanding how these things can influence our behaviors and beliefs. Self-management is the ability to manage those emotions, thoughts, and actions in different situations so that we can achieve individual and collective goals. This includes coping with stress and anxiety, persevering through challenges, and taking action to create positive change. Social awareness is how we understand others, how we learn to take different perspectives and empathize even with people who are different from us. It also includes understanding how the broader norms and systems around us influence how we develop and create a sense of belonging. Relationship skills are how we connect and engage effectively with others, and how we form lasting friendships and connections. This includes communicating clearly, solving problems together, managing conflict and disagreements, and standing up for ourselves and the rights of others. Lastly, responsible decision-making is how we put it all together to make caring and constructive choices. This includes thinking critically about consequences, analyzing the impact of our actions on ourselves and others, and identifying solutions that support our collective well-being. We continue to develop and practice SEL throughout our lives, and can adapt and apply these competencies across different contexts and cultures. How we develop SEL is impacted by our environments, which is why we need to work together across classrooms, schools, families, and communities. In the classroom, students can be explicitly taught SEL skills and also can practice and apply SEL during core subjects, like discussing different perspectives in social studies and language arts, or collaboratively problem solving in science or math. SEL is most effective when supported by evidence-based programs and trusting relationships where students are treated as partners in their learning. Beyond the classroom, SEL can be intentionally promoted throughout the school experience, from the way they're greeted in the morning to how discipline practices are carried out and how adults themselves develop and model positive relationships and the SEL competencies. Outside of school, families and caregivers provide the earliest and ongoing learning and interactions for their children, so it's important that schools listen to and authentically partner with families to help shape SEL priorities and strategies for supporting their children. Similarly, when schools partner with community organizations to align their efforts, SEL opportunities can be strengthened and students benefit even more. With SEL, we can help create schools and learning spaces where all young people feel connected, inspired, engaged, and ready to contribute to the world around them.
All right. Well, I hope that that was a really great summary of what social emotional learning is and how it shows up in the different contexts and environments that our children are in. So let's just quickly break down kind of what are the competencies and why are they so important. Um, so just a brief kind of history of SEL. So social emotional learning is not new. It's not a new topic in education or in global conversations. It's, kind of some of the first, like Dr. Tegan Reeves mentioned in the last presentation, showing up with Piaget and some of the early kind of philosophers and theorists around education started talking about social emotional learning and how our greatest cognitive growth happens through our social interactions. And that's what school is all about. That's what our homes are all about. And you'll notice one thing in this Castle video is that there was this really strong emphasis on relationships, about the caregivers who are creating and managing the environments for our children. And so the reason why social emotional learning lately has been elevated to a more national and global conversation is that the pandemic forced us to think about the environment for our children. In response to the pandemic, children being isolated, not having as many social interactions, not having the predictability and routine of school, it really elevated the conversation around taking care of the social and emotional well-being and health of our children and adults, for that matter. But we'll talk about that in terms of adulthood in just a minute. And so social emotional learning, I think, is finally getting the attention that it deserves and that it should have been receiving since the kind of inception of formal education. What we know is that our academic competencies grow alongside our SEL competencies. Our SEL competencies support us in our academic competencies. And so, like, the video noted that these social emotional learning competencies show up in our academic work. So when we're asking children to collaborate on a project, to have a dialogue, to problem solve something in their classes, these are all of these important SEL competencies that are in service to academic work. And so now if you're kind of watching the news around what's happening in America and also kind of more on a global perspective, is that more and more leaders are really putting social emotional learning to the forefront. So states are creating standards around what should be happening in classrooms to teach, model, and practice SEL. There are huge pots of money available to schools right now, through some of the acts pushed out by the government, to support social emotional learning in schools. And so what kind of the hope is in the social emotional learning field is that this momentum and this elevation of the topic really continues, because it really is what's best for the education of our children. And I'm also so happy now that the national dialogue is around universal preschool and early access to education, because that's where really this kind of formalization of social emotional learning comes to light, where maybe it's our children's first time in a social setting where they're really getting a chance to learn and practice and make mistakes and learn more and practice again, is their first kind of avenue into schooling, which is through preschool and Head Start programs. So that's a little bit of context of why this topic is so important. And as parents, why we want to pay attention to this is that our children are in school sometimes for longer than they're home with us. And so the environment in school is so important to their development of academic and social emotional learning. And we are our children's best advocates. We are experts on our children. And so, in partnership with schools, we do want to make sure that our child, from a whole child perspective, is being educated and taken care of. So, kind of getting back to these competencies, these are the 5 competencies. And I encourage you, if you want to read more about each of these, Castle is a great resource. And I'm also going to be recommending some additional resources later on. So, let's think about the competencies. Competencies are more umbrella terms, and competencies are made up of a set of skills that are learned over time. They're not something that you master. So if you're thinking about self-awareness, so that's really being able to consider and understand our own emotions. That, in pre-K, if you're a parent of a pre-K student, you might see a lot coming home, or programming like PBS Kids has for preschool students on recognizing emotion, talking about emotion, identifying, using the language to describe our emotions. And then we move into self-management. So now, how do we manage these emotions? Right. And so these skills are on a developmental continuum, starting at birth and moving all the way through adulthood. And so when you think about, preschoolers, we're really beginning how to regulate our emotions in the context of peer interactions, how to initiate pro-social behaviors and form friendships. Will you play with me? Can I play with you? That's some of the language you'd hear in a pre-K setting. Really staying connected with adults at this age. And so adult to child relationships are really formative. Kind of birth through pre-K, it's heavily more weighted on the adult to child relationship. They're looking for our guidance. We are their key source of safety and creating predictable routines. And also really, beginning to follow social norms and rules, taking turns. And this is all with adult guidance. And let's see, let's pause for a second for a quick question that came in. My child has trouble being independent. Does SEL help children become independent? Yes. So, social emotional learning, through the using routines, predictable routines, where children are allowed to practice the same skills over and over and over again, allows our children to be more autonomous and independent. So if you're at home with a child, toddler, pre-K, or you're in a school setting with that same age, and the best way to really kind of reinforce this concept of independence is to create an environment that's just for that age group. So how are we cleaning up materials? How are they organized? Giving children choice can offer a sense of independence. This is, kind of often a time where you're going to hear no. So, do you want this? No. So, instead of yes or no response questions, open it up to choice. Do you want this or do you want that? Creating schedules together that your child can independently follow. So it's all about promoting that sense of autonomy through kind of the safety and guidance that you can offer. And then kind of a quick connection to that question is also, thinking about that responsible decision making. So kids do want to make decisions for themselves. They want to have a sense of power and control. Nobody likes to feel out of control in their environment. That's why we kind of have systems in place. We have routines. We have clocks that tell us what time it is. We want to know when we're coming and when we're going, and all of these that are seemingly small little factors and mundane factors that adults we do to just manage our daily lives. If those are predictable and implemented consistently, also help with a sense of independence. So, and then just quickly kind of moving on from preschooler to elementary age children, really in the elementary level, you're forming more kind of 2 or 3 person friendship groups. Um, they are more able to control impulsive, kind of emotional and kind of triggers and behaviors. Um, they're able to resolve more complex social issues and implement more solutions. And so, what's important to consider with these competencies is that we can't just say to a child, you need to be more socially aware. Well, what does that mean? They need a set of strategies and skills in order to really be competent in that area, in the same way that we would teach, for example, long division in upper elementary school. You need a set of math skills in order to be able to do long division. So let's look at an example now, a more concrete example that happens in our homes, and we can move to the next slide. And that's around cooking. So we're going to use our chat now. So if I said to you, go, please bake something, bake a pie, bake cookies, what set of skills would you need in order to be able to go bake a pie, for example? So write in the chat, what are the skills that you need in order to be able to bake a pie? All right, so let's think about all of the skills that we need in order to be able to be an accomplished, chef or baker. So we need to be able to read a recipe, measure, know what tools to use, how to mix, how to safely use an oven. We need to know the effects of temperature. We need to know the effects of timing. We need to know cooling, cutting, serving. So these are all of the skills that we need in order to successfully bake a pie. And if you think about that process that you go through, you think about how many times you have tried and built your skills, you failed, you burnt something, you cooked it too long, you used a wrong ingredient, you mixed for too long, and then you went back and you tried again. And every single time we go through that process, we're building our skills towards becoming competent at baking a pie. And so this is a great analogy for how we develop these social emotional learning competencies, is that it requires a set of skills over time where we try them in different situations, we learn from our mistakes, we try again, in. We learn about our individual contributions towards the group. And then we continue to build these skills and learn over time so that you're working towards competency. And one thing I think also due to the pandemic, since social emotional learning was kind of highly elevated in the national and global conversation, is you'll see more workplaces talking about these social emotional learning competencies, like self-awareness and making decisions and social awareness, and how as adults we're continuing to build these competencies because they're so vital to the workplace, and they're so vital to having teams that really are able to work productively and efficiently together. So, just kind of going back to the point that social emotional learning competencies are not something you master and move on from. They're something that we're continuously learning and evolving all the way through adulthood. All right, so we can go to the next slide now. So here are skills needed to cook, and whether you cook alone, you have your children help you, or in school sometimes they do cooking projects. I know my kids make. Typically, we live in New England, and so we typically in our classrooms they make applesauce, and so they go through all of the skills needed in order to make applesauce, and those are academic and social emotional learning skills. So if you're here listening and you want to put in the chat, what's something that you can think of in your home that requires a set of skills to be competent at? So cooking is just one example that's kind of near and dear to my family's heart. And so, yes. Cleaning up toys. So that's a good one. So, it would be amazing if you could stand in your house and say, okay, clean up the toys. And then it just everybody knew how and where and when to put away the toys. But likely as a parent, you have created a system and you have modeled and practiced over time all of the skills needed in order to pick up our toys. So we have gardening and cleaning, exactly. Laundry. So wouldn't that be great if I put a basket of laundry on my second grader's bed and said, here, go fold this laundry. So we have to work on the skill of laying the shirt flat, how to fold the sleeves in, how to fold socks over, how to organize the clothes into piles. And then you move into putting laundry away in our dressers or closets. So you think about, being able to do that successfully as an adult. I think sometimes as adults, it's easy to forget that we had to learn and grow these skills over time. So think about that. We all, I think, in a hurried life that's busy with activities and work and house maintenance and taking care of children, it's easy to just say out loud what you want to have happen. The hard part is really thinking about, do my children have the skills? Have I taught and modeled the skills needed for them to be successful in that? And it's worth taking the time to teach and model those skills. And we're going to, when we talk about social emotional learning in the home, we're going to dig a little bit more into that. All right, next slide, please. All right, so let's think about social emotional learning in the home. So this is a picture of me and my three daughters. Let's see. Maybe 4 years ago at my mom's house, and we were doing some crafting at her dining room table. And so I thought this was a good visual representation of kind of social emotional learning in action in a home with a family. So look at this photo and think about crafting with your family or something similar, whether you're doing a puzzle or a game. What skills do my children need in order for this to be successful, for this activity to be successful? So just drop that in the chat. What skills do you think they need? Just everyone a couple seconds if you want to drop that in the chat. So one might be, for example, for my youngest child, Juniper, who's on the kind of the left of me in the nightgown. One for her that we were working on at the time is choosing which tool to use. Right. So a skill that you develop at a young age is, how to use a paintbrush or a marker or a crayon, how to hold it so that you can color on your paper. My two older daughters were sharing resources. So, how do we take turns? How do we manage our time so that everyone has fair, kind of equal access to materials? Um, how do we ask for help? What do we do when we're frustrated? Do we stay at the table? Do we ask for help? Do we take a break? So there's a lot of skills needed, in particular for group work, because there are all of these social dynamics at play. All right, and we can go back to the slides now. All right, so let's look at how social emotional learning shows up at the home. What does it look like? So, responsible decision making might look like helping to make a plan. And that can be, what are we doing this morning? What should be our plan for breakfast? We have these three things to do today. Let's talk about a schedule. So remember, responsible decision making is at the individual level, and it's also for the greater good of the group, whether that's in the home, it's a group of friends, or whether at school. So self management, so goal setting, it's, young children can set goals that will look different, whether your child is maybe preschool aged or elementary or middle school aged. But goal setting is a great way to help children learn how to manage themselves, um, and so that they can accomplish whatever it is that they're hoping to accomplish. So, so I'm going to give you a good example from my home. Um, my daughters really wanted to earn a Lego Friends set. And so, that was their goal. And so, in order to do that, they needed to create a plan to get done whatever chores they needed to get done. So, one cleans the bathroom, one put the laundry away. And so, we talked a lot about, and they didn't want to do those things, mind you. So they were they were a bit frustrated, but we had to go through that self-management process because in order to accomplish our goals, sometimes we have to do hard things, and we need to learn how to be self-aware. We need to name and acknowledge that we have these emotions, and then how do we manage ourselves so that we can get to the goal that we've set, whether that is just individually for you or whether it's collective for your family. So self-awareness, so looking at naming and talking about emotions. And so a really great time to do this is kind of just during regular transitions in the day, getting ready for the morning, driving in the car, having dinner before bedtime, really talking about emotions through conversation during different points in the day. You don't have to do anything major or explicit. There are lots of different games and, kind of like I said, PBS Kids programming that will really address this, and it's just through conversation with your children. Relationship building through a lot of cooperative play activities that you can do in the home. Or, I mean, there are also competitive gameplay. So if you're playing, something like Candyland or Go Fish or Uno, or if you're playing a cooperative game in building with Legos or Magnetiles, really focusing on conversational skills and building relationships, asking questions, and taking perspectives. And the other is social awareness. And you might do this through being part of your community, even just being out and about in the community and noticing having a dialogue about what you notice, um, modeling and practicing empathy towards people that are unlike you, or if you're in a community that's unlike your community, that's a great place to model and practice empathy. The other, the thing I want to say about social emotional learning in the home is that you do not, it doesn't have to be something that is a long, drawn out, explicit, structured activity. You can teach and model and practice social emotional learning through everyday life and routines. If you're not able to sit every single day and model it through a one-on-one cooperative game, you are not failing your children. Um, as adults, we have lots of opportunities to practice this when we talk about our own days, when we talk about our own feelings, um, when we use self talk to name our emotions, to name what our strategy is to manage our emotion. When we make mistakes, talking about the mistake we made, teaching our children how to apologize, when to apologize. So these are all ways that we can model for our children, and also, playing games and taking the time to really enjoy our children and learn about them through play. I would quickly, I wanted to just talk about kind of, tantrums, and a topic that comes up a lot are kind of big emotions. So, tantrums, especially in the toddler into preschool age. And so, when you think about self awareness and you think about self management, so safety comes first. And so when your little one is having a tantrum, if they're not hurting themselves and they're not hurting anybody else, tantrums are okay. It's a way that we're expressing our big emotions. And so when everyone is calm, it is a good opportunity to talk about the emotion, to talk about what may have triggered that emotion. You really want to avoid during a tantrum is what you want to avoid is teaching new strategies, or having a cognitive conversation. So when kids are having tantrums or a meltdown, they're in their emotional brain. They're not in their cognitive problem solving brain. So it's important for us to teach coping skills and calming down skills when a tantrum is not happening, when emotions are under control and children are feeling regulated. And so we have a great question that just came in, is how to encourage responsible decision making during a meltdown. So we're going to do that before and or after a meltdown. Like I said, when kids are in tantrum or meltdown phase, they are in their emotional brain. And so um, making a responsible decision for themselves is going to become for or after that. And so we can teach, and Moshi has some really great short Moshi moments that address tantrums, calming down, cooling down. And these are great to listen to so that post meltdown, you can help children remember that they have strategies for calming down, for making a decision about what's best for them, what's best for their family. But like I said, tantrums are a pretty typical and common symptom of being a toddler, of being a young child, where you don't have all the words and the tools to communicate and calm yourself down. So if they're not hurting themselves and they're not hurting you or siblings, or they're not putting anyone in danger, that's okay. Tantrums are okay. Kids can lay on their bellies and pound their fists on the floor, and nothing bad's going to happen. They're letting out those big emotions. It's their way of trying to regulate. And so our job is to teach them the tools to help them with emotion management outside of that. All right, so we have another comment in. My daughter's always has a mini panic attack when we ask her to clean her room, but now I know it's just that she has a hard time with the organizational skills. Yes. So I hear you. I my my middle daughter, when she's in fourth grade, and she is a bit of a perfectionist. So when I ask her to clean up something, if she doesn't know the exact way, there's not the exact right container. Same, she has a mini panic attack because she doesn't have the skill to look outside the environment and kind of problem solve, how can I make this organization work? So what I've learned about her is I have to slow down and say, okay, we have all these resources available. We need to really think about what skills you can pull on in order to be able to do this. Mhm. Yeah, good point. So parents are often in their emotional brains when a child is having a meltdown or a tantrum too. It is very hard to see and hear your child struggling with big emotions. So during a tantrum, as long as you have an eye on your child, everyone's doing okay. It's also a good time for you to take a breath as well and calm our emotions down, because our children are going to take cues from us. They're going to oftentimes they mirror back to us, the way that we are behaving and the way that we are talking. So take a moment to calm yourself down. Problem solving conversations, teaching about responsible decision making, reminding kids about self management strategies. These conversations are best had when everyone is feeling calm. And sometimes that's not right after a tantrum or meltdown. Sometimes after a tantrum or meltdown, a child just needs to be held. Maybe they need to hear their favorite book, or if you do use Moshi, you want to listen to a story. If it's because they're overtired, a nap is in order, and you need to talk about it after nap time. Um, Sometimes post tantrum or meltdown, really just to get kind of more regulated and ready to have the conversation, you just need to implement whatever kind of soothing mechanism is most helpful for everybody. And sometimes space. Space is a really effective strategy. If your child's laying in their bed and they're fine and they're calming down and you need space and you just need to go sit and do whatever it is that helps calm you down, whether it's scrolling through social media or it's reading a book for a couple of minutes. And it's okay to talk about it. I need some space. I'm going to go read my book for a couple minutes. You're going to take some space in your room, and we're going to talk about this in a couple of minutes when everyone is calm. And that's okay. It's okay to use space as a strategy. All right, so let's look at our language now. So we've kind of looked at what it looks like in a home. Now let's talk a little bit about what it sounds like. So let's pull up. All right, let me give you a moment just to read through. I put some examples of what social emotional learning can sound like in the home. Okay, so what I a couple things I want to point out about our use of our language in modeling and practicing social emotional learning in the home is that we want to be very specific. So common language used in the home every day are kind of general praise, right? So oftentimes you'll say, "Great job. You did so good." And that's encouraging, and kids absolutely want to feel like you noticed them and they were encouraged. Something to think about, kind of when you're thinking about social emotional learning and being very specific, is name what you noticed and then what that showed you. So that's going to encourage them to repeat what we would call pro-social behaviors. And so if you are specific about it, then they are more likely to repeat that, opposed to great job playing with your sister. Well, that's encouraging. You definitely noticed them, but what was great about it? So in the first example, I noticed that you helped your sister without her asking. That shows you were paying attention to what she needed. So if we're thinking about that social emotional learning competency of social awareness, that really reinforces effort and skill building toward that competency. So, practice, and you're going to stumble over your words, and it might not feel natural at first. And you might set a goal of just trying it out one time per day. You're going to work on your SEL language with your children. And you can also work on it with another adult. If there's two adults in the household, you can work on it together. But the more specific you can be, the better. And the other thing I'll say about kind of this language is that it can oftentimes prompt an ongoing conversation. So if you look at the last example, you two played trains without any arguing about who got which train. That showed me that you worked on turn taking and had a lot of fun together. So kids might say, we did have a lot of fun together, and this is how we took turns, and this was our strategy, and we problem solved. And so it could evolve into a much bigger conversation. And so you're gonna, the goal is you don't want to hit kind of when we talked a couple of minutes ago about you are going to be faced with no. If you ask a yes or no question, if you say something more general like good job, you're often going to that's the end of the conversation. You want to use language that's going to encourage additional conversation and really kids being able to reflect on their social emotional learning, whether you're not naming social emotional learning, but through your words, you are reinforcing social emotional learning. And this is also where self-talk comes in again, is that talk out loud about your own emotions, about what you did well, about what was a challenge for you, how you solved a problem. A good a good example from my house would probably be around laundry. So sometimes I get very irritated that I wait all the way until Sunday to do all of the laundry. And I'm frustrated and I'm overwhelmed and I don't want to do it. I wish I had done it throughout the week. But because of life and a tad bit of laziness, I didn't. So I might model for my children. I'm really frustrated that I didn't take the time to do that. I'm going to make a plan for next week to do XYZ. So I think really using our language to model our emotions, how we're going to manage ourselves, how we are going to make responsible decisions is a really good model for how we want our children to talk and behave. We're also going to drop a resource in here. Castle has a really great parent resource that I think we're going to drop in the chat now, or maybe it's already there. There is a quiz that you can take, and based on how you answer the quiz and how old your children are, it'll give you a whole bunch of resources and next steps and different strategies to try. I think it's pinned at the top of the chat. There is also, let's see. Yep, that's probably the only resource we've put in there so far. So take a look at that after this presentation or sometime throughout this week. A good one to do alone or with another caregiver who lives in your home. And it will give you some good resources in terms of continuing to support your child's social emotional learning. All right. So let's see. Let's move on to what social emotional looks like, what it looks like and sounds like in the classrooms now. For those of us whose children are in a whether it's a daycare center or a preschool program, um, elementary school, middle school, anywhere kind of if we think about school, it's any more outside of our home, formal-ish education setting. So this is a picture, right? The little girl in the turquoise in the middle is my oldest when she was in elementary school. It was a really hot end of the school year week in June. And so they did all outdoor water play. And the reason I know kind of more of the context around this is they had asked some parents for some resources to contribute. And so it took a couple of days in order to organize all of this. So when you think about organizing a school to do water play outside, which is not a typical routine or strategy, what are some social emotional learning skills that you think these kids needed in order for this to be successful? What needed to happen in order for them to be able to work together? So if you have any ideas, put those in the chat. And I'll give one example is that we really needed to practice our management, self-management. So breaking a routine, it's less predictable. So for some kids, that can feel scary. Hopefully, for no kids, this was a surprise. Surprise is not always a good emotion for kids. And so they really needed to work on managing their emotions around having a different routine, a different structure in place. The other skills that the kids needed to practice were working together to get all of the supplies outside. Um, they needed to make a plan. The older kids made a plan for where the stations would be set up that made the most logical sense, how kids would move from one place to the next. They needed to brainstorm all of the different tools that they could use in the water to play water play. There were differing opinions on what was best for water play. So, how do you listen, contribute, consider perspectives, manage your emotions in a conversation where you do not agree with the opinion of the other people? So, there were a lot of skills that were practiced and developed by changing the routine at school. And this is a kind of a bigger example. Social emotional learning shows up every day, all day in schools, and we're going to talk about that. But this was a good way for the kids to really bring their social emotional learning outside of a typical classroom context. So we're going to drop in the chat another resource for you from Learning Forward, which is an organization that provides resources primarily for educators. And it's a really great graphic of what social emotional looks like in the context of a classroom throughout the day. So take a look at that when you have a chance. But if you were to go inside of a school into a classroom, this is that really has SEL at the forefront. This is likely what you would see. You would see clear expectations. So there would be either school-wide rules, classroom rules. They may be a standard set of rules. They may have been co-created between the adults and the students. But routine or expectations and rules would be very clear. There would be no guessing on what was expected of you. There would be routines in place that promote autonomy. So going back to that question about how do we really teach and support independence, this is a huge part of school. teachers cannot help manage every single child. So oftentimes in classrooms, there are routines and structures in place that promote independence and autonomy. So those are going to be, how do you enter the classroom? Where do materials go? What do you do first? What's a safe way to transition? So those are all, how do you get materials out? Where do you put them when you're done? Those are all routines that promote autonomy. So there's also, you're going to see activities that promote significance and belonging. So what we know is that significance and belonging are two key indicators for our social learning, how we fit in a group, we belong there, and then what individual contributions do we make. And so teachers will do this by pulling kids together for some sort of morning circle or meeting where students are able to greet one another, share something about themselves, do some community building, and have their voices heard to begin the day. Um, you're going to see a nice balance of, creating a safe and welcoming environment, and then a safe place to take risks. And those might be social risks, they might be academic risks, and likely in a classroom that uses social emotional learning, that's scaffolded. So the beginning of the year, you're going to see likely less risk taking. And then later on in the year, as the community starts to solidify, everyone really has a strong sense of belonging, you're going to see that risk taking may increase. All right, and can we pull back up the slide to continue to go through the list? Thank you. You may also see a space for self-control. So we talked about this when we were talking about the tantrums, is that, children are still practicing the skills needed for self-control. Where do you go when you need to calm down? How do you know you need to calm down? What do you need in your space in order to get back into control? So most classrooms have a space where students can go to regain self-control. That might be a cozy corner, that might be soft, maybe a stuffed animal, there might be little fidgets, there might be headphones with music. I just talked to one teacher a couple of weeks ago that does have an iPad over there with headphones where they can listen to Moshi music, or the Moshi, the Taming Tantrums moment. And we can put that in the chat for you as well. There's a few different Moshi things that help with self-control. It's Tame Tantrums with Mumbo. I was just double checking the title on that. So you'll often see a place within the classroom, and then also some schools have a school-wide space where students can go to regain self-control. And so the goal is always, once you regain self-control, you go back and you continue your academic and social work with your peers. Okay, I'm ready to go back to that list. Thank you. You'll also see opportunities for group and partner work. And so group and partner work is where we're practicing our social skills, eye contact, listening, disagreeing respectfully, giving and receiving feedback, turn taking, and that can be language-based turn taking or more object or physical based turn taking. So group and partner work is where students really get to practice the social emotional learning skills in the context of that social learning. And then lastly, what you'll see is choice in their learning. And so sometimes we don't have a choice. Sometimes we have to do the assignment as is, and other times you get choice. So if you're learning about maybe different species of trees in New England, you might get to choose which tree you're going to study and how you're going to show what you learned. That would be a choice in your learning. And so teachers give choice in learning because it allows the children to really relate to the topic, which can motivate and encourage us. opposed to saying, you're going to learn about this one thing, I'm going to give it to you, and it may not have meaning. And that's where you lose motivation and attention and kind of that sense of significance about honoring what is important to the individual students in our classroom. All right, so let's look at what social emotional learning might sound like in the classroom now. And so going back to those parent examples, a lot of those examples will show up in classrooms as well. So it's language that's really specific, that reinforces pro-social behavior, opposed to general, non-specific good jobs, or general praise. You might hear language that reminds students of expectations. So, for example, the class lines up, they're going to be walking through the school hallways to get from their classroom to their physical education class. A teacher might say, remind me, what does the transition look like and sound like through our school? So students can say, our voices are quiet, our bodies are quiet, we walk in a straight line. And all of these expectations are so that you don't disturb the learning of anyone else. And the teacher has taught that. And the teacher offers a way for students to remind them of what the expectations are. This is a really great strategy, too, to use in the home that I should have brought up when we were talking about the home, but using reminders allows children to tell us what they know, right? They can be the experts on what does it look like and sound like to make a transition. So using that and letting your children have more of a voice is also a good strategy for home. And then also kind of language that helps students to see themselves in a positive way. So helping them envision where they can, go as learners, where they can go as friends, where they can go as experts in something. And this really thinks about kind of this more open-ended concept. If you're studying, let me think of an example. You're studying small machines, say in upper elementary school. Imagine yourself in, 100 years from now, you've created a simple machine that solves X problem. What would it be? What would your contribution be? And letting children really just think about themselves beyond that moment, right? And that takes away any challenge. It eliminates the barriers. They can literally do anything and dream up anything, and make a positive contribution. So teachers will often use language that takes children outside of the here and now and helps them envision themselves a bit into the future. And that's also another great one for use in the home, is that you can do that with your child as well, especially kind of in those younger years where imaginative play is really at the forefront of what is happening. Kind of using that envisioning language is a good way to reinforce where they are in their play. All right. So, like I said, we're dropping that learning forward resource in the chat for you so that you can take a look at that visual. All right. So now let's move on to how we can best be an advocate for social emotional learning. So the first thing that you can do is build your awareness and education around the developmental continuum of social emotional learning. So when we looked at that kind of rainbow colored scope of from birth all the way through adulthood, how old is your child and what are the developmental considerations for social emotional learning? So let's right now, actually, since we're talking about this, drop in the chat, how old are your children? Let's get a sense of where we are in that continuum. And mine are 12, 9, and 7. I know in the Generation Moshi Facebook group as a whole, we have brand new parents with brand new babies at home, and we also have parents like me with at least one child in middle school. All right, we have a toddler and a infant. We have a nice range of ages here. So when you're thinking about how to be an advocate for your child, think about where they are on this continuum. Thanks for pulling back up that slide. Um, And when you're working, if your children are outside of the home during the day because you're working or other reasons, and you are working with the caregivers of your children, it's really important that you know where they fall so that you know how to have conversations. You know how to receive feedback and what that means in the overall developmental continuum, because like we talked about in the beginning, building these social emotional learning competencies is a lifelong journey. There's no mastery or stopping point. It's just continuing to build skills. And then thinking about questions that we can ask and ways that we can have a dialogue with caregivers and teachers of our children. Um, Here are some questions that you might want to ask. You can ask, do you integrate and teach social emotional learning in your classroom or in your school? And if so, do you use a curriculum? Is it embedded all day? There's different ways to approach social emotional learning in a school. And, schools often will put forward what their academic curriculum is. So you will likely, as a parent, know what math curriculum or English language arts curriculum they're using, what books your children should be reading. So think of social emotional learning as equally as important to that academic curriculum that you know about, and ask the questions. Some schools will use an explicit social emotional learning curriculum that has lessons. And some schools will use lessons and they embed it all day, every day. So that's that list that we looked at what social emotional learning looks like in a school. At Moshi, we have a set of lessons that teachers can implement that use Moshi content to teach explicit social emotional learning schools. And also Moshi can be used, to play music during transitions, using the Moshi moments, maybe after lunch and recess to help kids reset and get ready for the afternoon. So another question that you can ask is, what social emotional learning skills would you say are most important in your classroom? How can I best support my child with being ready to be in school? So asking questions from the partnership perspective of your child's teacher and you are probably the two people they see the most. And for some families, it's 50-50 because they're at school for a very long time. And so really approaching that conversation and questions from a partnership perspective. And then really thinking about reframing the thinking and language from this happens at school and this happens at home to thinking about a more holistic context for your child. So they're out of the home, either daycare, school, and then they're in the home. And how can we create continuity and consistency for our children? So notice things that you're seeing at home and ask the teacher, are you seeing those here? And if you are seeing those at school, what are some strategies that you're using that I can also try out at home? And vice versa. If you notice that your child is having a really hard time, say, with separation from you, but you've come up with a strategy for how to address that, how to better prepare them, you can also offer that up to the teacher. Hey, we're having a hard time with separation at home. Here's what's worked, passing this on to you so that you can try it out in school. So, sharing, like I said, from that partnership perspective is really going to help with this more holistic lens of our children. And then, lastly, I would say assuming positive intentions of educators, and then for educators assuming positive intentions of parents, right? So we have a big job as caregivers to take care of our children, maintain their safety, their well-being, teach academics, teach social skills. And so everyone is doing the best they can with the resources that they have. And so thinking about assuming positive intentions helps us to be better partners as adults to take care of our children. And then lastly, in terms of being an advocate, if your school has a parent and teacher organization or association, um, if you can't formally join the group because of your work or kind of whatever else, ask how you can gain access to resources. Ask if there's a platform where parents are able to share resources with each other. During the past 2 years during COVID, more and more schools have some sort of online platform because of a lack of in-person events. And so seek out ways that you can share or receive resources. Also, if you are on a parent teacher organization, I've worked with many schools all over the world where the parent teacher organizations will be advocates for teachers to receive training on social emotional learning, have the resources that they need. So if you're a part of a formal organization at your school, see what's available for resources for teachers so that they can continue to improve the way that they're meeting the social emotional needs of children. There's a really great resource through the National Parent Teacher Association that we've pinned in the chat for you. And they have lots of great free resources. They also have a big national conference. And so I would encourage you, if you are involved and you have children at the school aged level, look at the resources that they have so that you're better able to be a partner and an advocate at your school. So let's talk about some resources, kind of going back to looking at the developmental span. And these are some resources that you might also want to share within your parenting networks. So I've already shared with you the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. They have so many resources, no matter where you kind of fall in the parenting or education scope. They're kind of the catch-all for social emotional learning. Yardsticks is a really great developmental book for children aged 4 through 14. So we're looking at our preschool through middle school age students. I worked with Chip Wood for many years. He has studied under some of the top developmental psychologists. And so this book breaks down development from a cognitive, a social, and a physical and an emotional perspective. And so that book, I go back to it often when I don't know whether or not my child's behavior is normal to their age. I just need to be reassured that it's typical and that I can reframe my thinking to how it can really be a strength and how I can best support my child. So that's a really great book. You can buy that on Amazon. Also, there's an organization called 0 to 3. So if you are in that birth to 3-year-old sector, 0 to 3 is an amazing organization that provides resources, advocacy for birth through families, birth through 3-year-olds. So that resource is also pinned in the chat. Another thing I want to say, kind of connected to 0 through 3 from my work with early intervention, use early intervention as a resource. So if you're looking through the literature and you're noticing that you're not quite sure how your child is doing with developing social emotional learning, cognitive, physical skills, contact your local early intervention organization, they will go out and they will work with your child in your home, and they either will qualify for services or not. And if not, they will also give you some resources on how you can continue to support your child. It's an amazing resource with professionals that range from speech and language pathologists to developmental specialists to occupational and physical therapists to social work. And so in the birth through 3 market, there are a lot of resources because those are really the formative developmental years that are going to set kids up for future academic and social success. So use them as a resource. All right, let's go back to that resources page. And then, like I mentioned before, National Parent Teacher Association, lots of great resources, especially if you're connected with your elementary schools, or actually public preschools as well. And then if you want to get more educated on what kind of the education standards are in your state, each state has a list of standards, academic and social emotional learning standards. Check out what your state has to say around social emotional learning standards. There are about 13 or 14 states now that have formalized SEL standards through elementary school. Every state has some early learning standards, but that's a good way to see what teachers are using as kind of their North Star, their guidance towards what to be doing in classrooms. And I think we're ready for our last slide. I chose 3 of my favorite parenting books that connect to social emotional learning as a topic. So the first is Secrets of the Baby Whisperer. I read and used this book and referred back to it for all 3 of my children. And it's really around the intimate relationship between caregiver and child, and how from birth you are really leveraging and reinforcing that relationship, including your child's social emotional learning skills for a healthy relationship. Touch Points also starts at birth, and that's by Brazelton. He has a really interesting segment in this book on no and the word no as a full sentence, and how you can kind of go down one of 2 paths with your toddler when you're thinking about kind of child proofing your home, right? So we need to give children the opportunity to hear no and to have boundaries set. And if we so carefully curate our environment that they never have to have that opportunity, then when they leave and they have to generalize this, they're going to be a bit at a deficit. So think about in your home, when you're thinking about child proofing, and of course, safety always comes first. So I'm not talking about things like that would harm your child, but teach them about no, you can't touch that, and here's why. I really recommend Touch Points if you are thinking kind of which camp you're in around telling your child no. And then lastly, The Whole Brain Child, and that's where you can read more about kind of the emotional brain, the cognitive brain, and when and how to interact with your child when they're at different kind of emotional states. Daniel Segal and Tina Payne Bryson are amazing at the work they do. If you ever have the opportunity to go on and watch either one of them speak, I think some of their lectures are free on YouTube, but they will give you some really great strategies from the parenting perspective. All right. So that really concludes everything that I wanted to share today with this group on social emotional learning for the home and also for the classroom. Just a reminder that Generation Moshi is here as a support system for you. It is growing every day. It's amazing, the ideas that are being shared, the questions, the camaraderie, the relationships that are forming. And also, I just wanted to mention that myself and my coworker, Bexy, we're parents, we work at Moshi, and we're also mentors in the Generation Moshi group. And so reach out to us through direct message. We're happy to have a private chat with you. If you're having a hard time and you need to vent, if you want strategies, if you want tips, if you want to run scenarios by us, we're more than happy to be here as a support system to you. So I'm going to stay on for a little bit. If anyone has any questions overall in general, I'm going to open it up to questions now. So put those in the chat. And thanks to also everyone kind of behind the scenes who made this happen. I just want to say thank you for all of the work. So I'm ready for questions. All right, so we have a question in. I am big on boundaries and teaching my kids to be an advocate for themselves and their bodies. How can I continue to encourage this practice while incorporating relationship skills and cooperative play in their current and future friendships? Right, so great question. So, first of all, being an advocate for themselves and their bodies. So, good connection to what I was just talking about. No is a complete sentence. And so, teaching your child the power of no is really important in terms of setting boundaries. And you can also model that by saying no and setting a boundary for yourself and really modeling how no means no. This is my body and this is my space. And I'm going to be an advocate to myself toward you. And you are going to practice saying no and being an advocate for yourself with me. And home is a safe place to practice that so that when they're out in daycare and in school, they feel confident that no is a full sentence. With that said, and the cooperative play piece, being flexible in thinking and knowing how practicing and then being able to apply the back and forth dialogue. You can do that at home with your child so that they're prepared to do that in a more social setting. And so you might play a one-on-one game where your child doesn't win every game, where you're helping them identify and manage emotions, where you are modeling setting boundaries, where you're also modeling being on the receiving end and losing. Those are all great ways to really practice at home so that they're prepared for when they go play with their peers. Okay, so another a comment and I think a cry for help. Kids that always seem to have playtime ending in a fight. Yes. So that is mostly how playtime has ended in my home. So I can empathize with you. One thing that we've done at home, it's usually with my youngest, who's in second grade, is that her stamina to sustain a social interaction that's intense is much shorter than my older two daughters. So a strategy that we've started using at home to have things not end in fight is to have her time end sooner and do her transition sooner than the other two. My youngest is often the one that becomes dysregulated and has a harder time with self-management. And so we help her transition out before the other two. So that's one thing to think about is what do you know about the individual needs of your children? And so you can be proactive in helping them. The other is if it does end in a fight, agreeing on a signal as a family for a timeout. So if playtime is ending in a fight, it might not be the best time to clean up the play. It might be a good time for everyone to take some time and space to use their best calming down and coping strategies. And that might take 5 or 10 minutes. Just separate everybody and then come back together for cleanup. What we found in our home is that if it ended in a fight and I immediately started escalating it by saying, okay, break up the fight, time to clean up, it made everything much worse. So I had to let go of the cleaning up part. I had to allow everyone to have their time and space away from each other and then come back together. And so that's another way you can kind of help with that end of playtime fighting as well. All right. So I think that's about it for questions today. Like I said at the beginning, this will be this is recorded and will be in the Generation Moshi group for you to access. All of the resources that I posted will be in there as well. And again, feel free to reach out and use this group. We are a support system for you. Um, one final thing I wanted to put in the chat for you, since we kind of a lot of the questions and a lot of what we talked about had to do with emotion management. I wanted to put a couple of Moshi ideas for kids that are short and easy. You can play them in the car, you can play them when you're having a particularly difficult transition, you're teaching how to calm down. There's Simmer Down with Boomer, Topsy Turvy's Time for Calm, and Chop Chop's 5 Minute Chill. Those are all 5 minutes long. They're called Moshi Moments. And then the other one that I had referenced before was Tame Tantrums with Mumbo. And then one of my daughter's absolute favorite is Plinky's Peaceful Breathing. It's about 7 minutes and it really works on breathing as a calming down strategy. Really great characters. So we'll post these tracks for you in the chat as well. And I would say that if you have younger kids and you're looking for some resources for teaching some of these calming down strategies, look at the Moshi moments. They're much shorter in length. The meditations are longer. They're typically, they could range from like 8 to 15 minutes, maybe for the school age kids or a little bit older. Think about using those meditations and, of course, the stories for bedtime. But I just wanted to leave you with a couple of those moments that can help around emotion management. All right. Thanks so much for joining us. And we're always here in Generation Moshi Group. Have a great end to your Sunday.